Welcome to The Intentional Exit, a leadership legacy podcast for those who don't just want to retire, but want to do it well. I'm Rebecca Schriver, and this is where we help you protect what you've built, reduce unnecessary taxes, and create a plan that gives you clarity, confidence, and control. So together, we make sure your exit is not accidental, it's intentional. Before we begin, please note that the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as tax, legal, or financial advice. For guidance specific to your situation, we recommend consulting with a qualified professional.
If you buy all the materials and you put them in a pile to build a house, it doesn't mean you have a house. It means that you have the basic beginnings of creating the structure that you want to get into. And as we explore episode 17, we're going to talk about how to actually assemble the house in the right way, or how to build the structure. In episode 16, we discussed why structure is so very important. And today on episode 17, we're going to start to put together the pieces so that you can start thinking about your financial future and your family in a different manner. So, what is this structure? I keep telling you, hey, you need structure, right? We all need structure. Anytime you think about doing something well or accomplishing a really big task, structure is always involved, right? We don't just go around kind of blindly, wildly doing this, that, and the other, and maybe imitating this or imitating that. We understand that there is a certain process that helps us to establish the house in a good way. And so whenever we're talking about this structure, a lot of times people think of it in buckets, but I'd like to talk about it from the standpoint of pillars. So if we have pillars to our structure and to our success, and we balance them properly, and we put them into place in the right spots, we will start to find that our structure is really stable. However, if you're missing a pillar, or if maybe they're unbalanced, or maybe we didn't actually take care of building the structure the right way, we can find that it doesn't hold up the way we want it to. So let's start with our first pillar. What is our first pillar of success? And if you've been watching us for a while, you've heard me talk about how expenses drive the bus. Expenses dictate what our need, right, for income looks like. So it's that paycheck replacement. But I want to take a step back here, right? Because whenever we start talking about these pillars, we're basically going to give every dollar that we have a job. Because when you stop working, your dollars need to start working the right way. And so as we look at this distribution phase, and as we look at moving into our intentional exit, our dollars don't just need to be a pillar. The pillar needs a job. And so the first one is, of course, those expenses. And I'm going to narrow that down just a little bit. Instead of saying, expenses as a broad category, let's talk about cost of living. So when we're looking at cost of living, we're looking at things like, do you have a mortgage? Do you have car insurance? Do you have homeowners insurance? Are you going to want to eat? Electricity, water, all of those basic principles of the things that you absolutely need in order to survive. So that is our first pillar. We need to first know, hey, what do those expenses actually look like? How do those expenses for our day-to-day living, what do those expenses look like? How are we going to handle them? And what dollars do we need to show up in static income to be able to cover those expenses? And that static income then becomes our first pillar, right? So those are the things like Social Security. Those are the things like pension. Those are the things that are going to show up every single month or every single year religiously that we're going to be able to count on? And does that static income cover those expenses? And if the answer is yes, fantastic news, right? That means we have officially kind of covered our needs, our absolute needs, not our wants, but our absolute needs. But we also have this thing called inflation. And if you have a pension or Social Security, we have this thing called a COLA, or a cost of living adjustment. And so as we look at the cost of living adjustment, inflation has really been rampant lately. And the cost of living adjustments on things like pensions and Social Security aren't actually keeping up with inflation. We're seeing that being deteriorated time and time again, year after year, where if you have everything covered today, it's very likely that in 5 to 10 years, you're going to need additional dollars to cover those same basic needs. And that cost of living adjustment isn't going to actually be able to cover the inflation cost. Okay. And that's a lot of jargon, but at its basic value, what it means is the dollars that you need today, or that static income, is going to need to be greater, or we're going to need other dollars that we need to be able to pull from to be able to cover the same exact expenses in 5 years or 10 years. And so if we are just barely covering that with our static income, we need to be really intentional about creating the second pillar. And that second pillar are dollars that are designated to help us with those additional costs, to help us cover inflation. Because I want you to remember that retirement is not a day. It is not the day that you go and turn in your 2 weeks notice and say, hey, I'm retiring. That is the day that you change from a working income to your dollars now having a job of being able to take care of you. Retirement is that 20 to 30 year time period, sometimes even a 40-year time period, that covers those years that we are going to have our dollars be working for us, and our dollars are going to have that paycheck replacement job. Okay, so that is the job. And in pillar 2, what we need to do is have dollars that are going to be there to cover the additional cost that is going to come along down the line, even if your lifestyle doesn't change. Even if we are still only paying the same types of bills, but the cost of those bills has actually increased. And so that pillar is there to help make sure that we don't have to go back to work. That because we thought we could retire, but then we found out later down the road that the cost of things continued to go up, even though we didn't increase our lifestyle. We have to have an inflation pillar. We have to have that inflation bucket, if you will, to be able to make sure that we're not going to lose the spending power in the future, and that it's going to keep up over a 10, 15, 20, 30 year time period. And then we move into pillar 3. And a lot of people believe that pillar 3 should be in pillar 1. And while I agree they work together, if you try to put pillar 3 inside of pillar 1, you're going to find out very quickly that it doesn't keep up. Okay. And so pillar 3 is medical. And while this is a necessary lifestyle expense, it has a very different inflation factor. And so we know, based on how you choose to take care of your medical needs in retirement, very much changes how pillar 3 looks. So when we move into a Medicare, and I've been working with people on Medicare for 10 years now. I've been helping people to organize their Medicare. And in a future episode, closer to October, when you can actually do some things about it, we are going to walk through what are these different two very opposite sided things of how you can take care of your healthcare need and your healthcare expenses in the future. And so at its basic foundational principle, you can go with what we call the very cheap insurance model, which is you're not really paying much for the insurance. You may be even getting it for free, but the amount of cost that could come out of pocket is astronomical. And when you do this model, you have very little control over where you can go, who you can see, what procedures you can have done, because everything has to go through kind of a clearing system. And this is a very attractive thing at face value because people think of it the same way they thought of their group insurance. But what they don't realize is that they're giving up control and they're actually subjecting themselves to a very big bill when things go wrong. And we all know that as we get older, we don't typically get healthier, right? We know that as we age, our health typically doesn't keep up. It starts to steadily decline. That's why people go on vacations early in retirement. That's why they plan those first 10 years to go out and do all of the things that they've been waiting to do, that they've been saving to do. And we're going to get to that bucket, but we're going to talk about this medical portion and how important that medical portion is. Because if we don't plan well and we don't have a bucket on the side to kind of keep up with what will be asked of us to be able to pay, we can make mistakes, costly mistakes, high dollar mistakes. And then if we go on the other side of Medicare, then we have better control over our expense. We have better control over how much money we're going to have to pay if we end up needing to go somewhere. We have better control over what we have done or where we can go. But on the flip side of that, that insurance costs us something on an annual basis. And we can better plan for this side, but at the same time, it increases our expense when we're healthy. And so a lot of people, if they're healthy, will look at those two sides and think, oh, I want the side that's cheap because I'm healthy right now. And so why would I pay for extra insurance? But the trick becomes that if you go with the cheaper model, once you're sick, you can't flip to the more expensive one. Insurance companies are smart, right? They're very smart. They have actuaries who handle these things. And so when you do this, right, when you're taking care of it in this manner, what you're going to find out is that, you know, it's kind of 6 in one, half a dozen in the other, and it depends on what is more important to you. And so we also know that medical expenses, depending on how you handle it, are going to go up exponentially. And actually, it doesn't even matter which way you handle it. It matters that you understand that the cost of insurance, the cost of care, the cost of medicine has actually exponentially increased over time. And so we have to look at this because we know our inflation factor on that medical bucket is exponentially higher. And so we have to kind of dial that in as to how are we going to cover that need, or how are we going to build that pillar and then structure it the right way. Then we move on to 4. And 4 is the one, that pillar 4 is the one that no one wants to talk about. Everyone knows we need to talk about it. Everyone knows that it's important to talk about it, but they would really rather I don't bring it up. And that is long-term care expense. And so when we're looking at pillar 4, we're looking at long-term care expenses. And especially if you are married, this becomes even more important. Because if you're married and all of a sudden one of you needs long-term care, we know that the other three expenses or the other three pillars that we need to cover, well, they don't go away, right? Because we know that the person who's still healthy enough to live at home, or who's going to need help to take care of you while living at home, or is going to need to help be able to put you into a place where you're safe and taken care of, is still going to be at home. And we're still going to have things like maybe a mortgage. And if we don't have a mortgage, we still have a tax bill and an insurance bill and electricity and water and groceries and all of the things that are part of daily living. They're still going to have inflation. They're still going to see their cost go up. And they're still going to have their own medical expenses. And if you're needing long-term care, those medical expenses didn't go down, they went up. And so we need to hedge and make sure that we have a plan in place. And I'm not talking about traditional long-term care insurance. I hope you know that. I don't have anything against traditional long-term care insurance. Do I think it's the best way to handle things most of the time? No. Do I think that we still have to have a plan? Yeah, absolutely, right? And so whenever we're looking at this, if we can cover the cost of our need, and then we can cover the cost of inflation, and we can cover the cost of medical, and we can cover the cost of long-term care, at that moment, then we can also start to talk about all of the things we actually want to do, right? And if we look at this as a big bucket, if we start to pull this in and we think of these things as a big bucket, and we don't give our bucket certain jobs, and we just look at it as one big place that we pull everything from, we can exponentially increase the likelihood that we'll fail. And most people look at retirement as a giant bucket. Why is that? Why do we look at it as one big bucket? Because that's what we were taught. We were taught to look at retirement as a bucket, as an instant. We weren't told to look at retirement as a marathon. We were told to look at it as a sprint, as a day that this happens, and we have the cake and the punch, and everybody says, thank you so much for your years of service, and you're out the door. But it's what happens after you go out the door that really matters. And if we look at it as we accomplish retirement because we hit that dollar mark that we were aiming for, we hit that moment, and our account value looked the right way, and our years of service looked the right way, and now we can exit, what we'll find is that 4 or 5 years into this, all of a sudden that bucket has maybe pulled back a little bit. It's not as big. And we start to worry about the longevity of our bucket. And we start to worry about if we're going to have enough to be able to live on. And we start to worry about how inflation impacts it. And we start to worry about whenever that day comes that maybe we're not as healthy. And we start to worry about that day that maybe we need long-term care. But if we take the time to take a step back and to look at the pillars, right? To structure ourselves the right way, to kind of look at the different parts and pieces and how do they function together. And by the way, how do taxes affect it? Because you'd be surprised at how much more efficient things are if we actually look at the taxes first. And how much better things function if we take a look at how taxes affect it. Because if we handle, right, if we take the time to handle the taxes first, then all of a sudden, all of these buckets are more efficient. They work the right way. We're not using these dollars inefficiently that then creates additional taxes that we weren't expecting, and we have to pull out more and more money in order to be able to handle all of these things. We can become the most efficient possible, and it makes the fun bucket or the fun pillar even better. So instead of just building a house that we live in, All of the sudden, maybe it has a pool, it has a deck that we go out and enjoy, we have a flower garden, and all of the structure has joy inside of it. And don't we want joy? Yes, we do. We want joy. We want to be happy. We want all of our work, all of our time, all of our effort, all of our ability, all of those times that you sat and looked at your accounts, all of the times that you maybe didn't do this thing because you were putting money away to be able to live well in the future. We want that. We want to be successful in retirement. We want to be able to get in the RV and drive across the country. We want to be able to take the grandkids to the zoo. We want to be able to do all of these different and fun things. And the only way that we truly accomplish that is if we first can build the security, right? We have to put the structure in place. We have to build the foundation and then build our structure, put up our pillars, and then enjoy the things that we can create around this for the betterment of our lives. This includes charity and your church and time served with your church or your charity. Maybe you love going on mission trips. Maybe you are very passionate about helping out veterans. Maybe you're supportive of foster care. Maybe you like the local animal shelter and you want to spend your time there and your dollars there. Maybe you want to go and take the family on vacation because there are only so many years that we're going to be able to do this and go and enjoy. And you don't want your kids to have to worry about paying for it. You want to just go enjoy the life that you spent so many years looking forward to and so many years creating. But at the same time, at the very same time, if we look at it as one bucket, we can start dismantling the pillars that allow us to know that we have the ability to go out and do those things. And we're not going to not be able, which is a double negative, I get it, but we want the ability to know that in 10 years or 15 years, we're not going to be in a position that we can no longer afford food or medical care. Agreed? We want to make sure that we know that we're going to be able to sustain our lifestyle and that all of the sudden in retirement, we're not using our fund bucket inappropriately. And if you're in retirement, maybe you're 2 or 3 years into retirement and you feel like it's too late, but you're starting to worry about that bucket. Well, my guess is that no one sat down with you and created the structure. And so it's not too late. We can do absolutely nothing about yesterday or last year or last week. There's nothing we can do about what we've done in the past. We can only start today and work our way forward. And whenever we create the pillars, whenever we can do this. We don't feel like we can't. All it takes is some time and somebody who knows how to build the pillars, that general contractor for those exit years. And that's what we do. We help you to look at the structures and how they work together. And sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes we can even create the same exact pillars with the same exact bucket, and we don't have to take away from the fund bucket. Wouldn't that be a better way to organize your life? Wouldn't that be a better way to handle your family's future? My guess is if you really think about it, the answer is yes. And so if you'll go to our website, www.leadershiplegacypro.com, and you go to the resources tab, you are going to find out that we have a ton of resources there to help you get started. We have a ton of resources there that we have the blind spot finder. We've got the expense tool. We've got the long-term care tool. And if you go in and you start plugging in your numbers, you're going to start to see that the idea of creating these pillars is actually not as far-fetched as you think it is. And by the way, you can schedule your free consultation. It's completely free. There's no cost to us sitting down and starting to help you to organize your pillars so that your structure holds up. So I'm Rebecca Schriver. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We know that your intentional exit deserves more than just question marks. Let's remove the question marks and let's start to build the structure with intention so that you can be confident around your structure. Please remember that this podcast is not to be used as legal, tax, or financial advice. Everyone's particular situation deserves intention. It deserves a conversation, and we'd love to be able to help you with that conversation. So please like, subscribe, share us with a friend, go to the website, and start your path to finding out how do we build these pillars and how do we build our structure. Thank you so much for following us today, and we'll see you next week.